Hey, what's up, everybody? Real quick, do you have a coach on your holiday shopping list? Well, if so, you're in luck because the Coaches site is now offering gift cards. Head on over to thecoachesite.com/gifts to shop for an annual subscription to the Coaches site along with our suite of premium courses. A gift from the Coaches site ensures that coaches get access to the top thought leaders in hockey and that they are providing their players a fun and dynamic learning environment. Head over to thecoachesite.com/gift to find the perfect gift for that special coach in yours or your child's life. And now, on to the show. When you watch hockey these days, where does your attention go?
It's a great question. Honestly, it's been kind of refreshing for me because of my Olympic duties, and they've been expansive. Uh, you know, I've been doing a lot of watching games from uh, uh, a more of a GM point of view, kind of
Sure.
watching, how they're playing as opposed to watching the systems. I think you always have your coaching hat on and you're always looking at system play. You're just wired that way. Years of watching games that way. So it's been a little refreshing watching it more from an evaluation standpoint from the Olympics. Where you're zeroing in on one guy for the entire game and how he's playing, more that scouting perspective. So they're totally different viewpoints for watching a game. I find my brain flipping back and forth a little bit. I still get into the coaching mode more than I probably should. But the flip side of that is you also want to keep up to date on trends in the game. What are the little things that have changed over the summer from last year that teams are doing that maybe teams weren't doing last year that you might want to incorporate going forward.
Well, you know what? I heard you do an interview with Darren Millard and John Shannon, and you made a comment that, I think we can all appreciate that the NHL can be a bit of a copycat league. And you mentioned that a lot of the innovation sometimes can come from Europe. And I'm paraphrasing, but I think you kind of alluded to the fact that, just based on the job security that exists in the NHL or lack of it, that, it's just maybe the path of least resistance is doing whatever the Stanley Cup winner, employed. If there was an area of the game from a tactical perspective that was ripe for disruption, what would it be?
Wow, that's a great question. The game has gotten really offensive again. There's a lot of goals being scored. There's a lot of leads being changed. I know that the hockey fan out there is gonna kill me, but I think we're gonna see some version of the New Jersey Devils defensive mindset come back into the game because of that. I don't know whether it's in the neutral zone or in the D. We've already seen shades of it in the D zone. A lot of teams keeping their defensemen close to the net, leaving you on the outside. I think we might see some more of it in the neutral zone, but I think there's going to be a big focus because if you remember, the New Jersey Devils basically ended the the fun puck era, of the
Jeez, yeah.
Edmonton Oilers, and I think with the way the offense is going, I wouldn't be surprised if you see more defensive tactics being concentrated on to try and get that back under control again.
Well, I wonder, and I mean, the game has gotten so fast. The dimensions and the constraints haven't changed. Although, as we've all been hearing recently, there's going to be a game played on a smaller ice sheet over in Europe during the Olympics. I wonder, do you pull any tactical inspiration from your days playing in the old Windsor Arena? You
Actually, that's probably a good comparison. It might
might
it
bring out
might
some VHS
yeah,
tapes.
pretty similar dimensions. You know what? When the whole dimensions thing came up, the idea of it wasn't that this is going to be game changing. It was more that this is going to feel more normal than a normal European tournament would. That's all. I think this NHL surface, it's an NHL surface, a little bit smaller, but our NHL game is going to translate a lot better than it would when you're typically going over to Europe and maybe playing on a rink that's 200 by 100, and you really have to dig into changing some of your tactics in order to adjust to that. So there's not going to be any adjustment needed. And I think if anything, the physicality is going to be amped up a little bit.
Yeah, I would think so. And like I guess that comes down to roster construction. And I know you've been involved in um, most of, if not all of the management meetings. And I can't imagine what those decisions are like because I gotta think it's like trying to decide if you want to go to vacation in Hawaii or Bali. Like there's no wrong choices. But the word versatility comes up a lot, and having players that are maybe have a bit of a Swiss Army knife uh, characteristic to them. When it comes to versatility, what are some of the maybe underrated skills that are important when you're in that level of competition?
Yeah. Well, first off, just to talk about selection, I think everyone puts their mock teams on paper, um, and and everyone's got probably the same nine forwards and the same five or six defensemen, and then it's filling out the rest of the team, who goes in and who comes out, and what we lose sight of sometimes is that injuries are going to play a factor in that. And
Yeah,
you know what, in those extra, when they're making those decisions, yes, if two guys are even and one guy checks an extra box versatility wise. Let's say he's a centerman and can take face off as opposed to a winger, or let's say he's a
sure.
penalty killer, an elite penalty killer as opposed to a below average penalty killer analytically. Those type of intangibles and special skills can separate you from a guy you're even with. But if we get an injury to a top end guy, that goes out the window, and now all of a sudden you're looking at, okay, who can replace the elite skill that we've lost in the top six, and then a whole different group of names come into that than maybe the names that everyone else is talking about in the depth of the lineup, both on forward and defense. So I think I don't think it's as cut and dried and as easy. And we've still got a lot. We see the injuries around the league, and the condensed schedule and the stress it puts on teams and players. And we're going to see more of that through January. So, that's going to play a part in those decision makings. But, back to your question on versatility, we always use the term, do you check boxes? How many boxes do you check? Can you play multiple positions? Do you have a power and a finesse game? And then you're into detail thing. Are you a good face-off guy? Are you a lead on one special team or another or both? Um, and then you're into role acceptance. Is this guy going to be good if he plays 9 minutes a night? What kind of teammate are you? All those things, and then and intangibles like pedigree too, and winning. Has this guy won before? Those are all the things that kind of go into that pot of intangibles when you're talking about making those decisions.
Well, you just touched on the condensed schedule in the NHL, and man, I was just um, looking over the holidays here in Vancouver to take my son to a game, and you look at the schedule like over the calendar of a month, and you're just like, holy shit! Like when do you put your head up for a breath of air? And
Yeah.
I think from a coaching perspective, how do you approach the teaching aspect of the game, and that kind of rolls into the Olympics when. I don't know exactly how many days you're going to have with your group before the puck drops, but it's obviously going to include a pretty long flight and getting, situated. Is it a process of teaching more efficiently or perhaps teaching a little bit less?
Great question. I think you have to get creative in how you're going to teach too. We're going to name the team. Uh, I think early January, right? Or January 1st, I believe the date is. You know your group on January 1st. I know in the Four Nations we started pumping out some information at that point to them, just trying to get their heads starting to think about it. But you're right, you're getting over there. They're flying, they're coming off probably all of them off a week where they just played 3 games in 5 nights, and then got on a plane to Europe. So we do have a little bit of a runway in Europe, way more than we had at the Four Nations. At the Four Nations, I believe we had one practice and then they dropped the puck. At the Olympics, I'm trying to think of the schedule on the calendar, but I think we kind of arrived Sunday, and our first game is Wednesday, Wednesday or Thursday is Thursday afternoon. So you've got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I'm not sure you can practice all 3 of those days. Maybe you can. Maybe and you talk about all kinds of things. If you don't practice, then you've at least got to find other ways to start incorporating your system play, whether it's video sessions or
Yeah.
maybe walkthroughs. You've got to get a little bit creative, but always with an eye on the idea that these guys are going to be coming over there fatigued. And then, to win a gold medal, you're going to have to play 3 round robin games, at least a quarter, a semi, and a final in probably 11 or 12 days. So, that's another 6 days, 6 games.
Yeah, I like. Yeah, I can't imagine the hamster wheel that's going to be when you guys touch down over in Italy. I thought it was interesting, and I'm assuming strategic that you guys have returned I believe the entire Four Nation staff for the Olympics. What did you learn at last year's tournament that maybe what would maybe be some information that you have now because you all went through that experience together that perhaps you wouldn't have had you just all the staff had been made up for this tournament?
Yeah, it's a great question. One, I, I think I'm not surprised that both the U.S. and our staffs are the same because uh, we I can't speak for the U.S. staff, but I'm going to assume it's exactly the same. I think you learn a lot when you get thrown together. It's the first time the four of us and the four of them have probably all worked together in that type of situation. Um, and honestly, the thing you learn the most is just workflow, how everybody works, how you turn things around quickly. I mean, we start with a back to back at the Olympics, and it sounds like it's easy, but the workflow of reviewing the first game, preparing for the second game, getting the special teams in order, you're still teaching, cutting all that video, pre-scouting your next opponent. I mean, that workflow, not stepping on each other's toes, who's going where, role responsibilities. I mean, that's stuff that all gets flushed out. And I think we walked out of the Four Nations with a lot better idea of who's going to be doing what, and our ability to be more efficient at the Olympics, I think, is going to be greatly much greater because of that.
I bet. Um, Earlier this year, you were inducted the inaugural inductee into the Kitchener Rangers legacy level. Um, when you look back at the 7 years you spent in Kitchener, let's say at some point you write a book on your career. What's the title of the chapter about your time in Kitchener?
Oh
What's it
God.
called?
Probably the golden years. It was just an awesome era, in my coaching and personal life. I had a young family. It's such a special hockey community to live in and work in. And during that time period, we had kids. We raised them in a great environment and in such a warm and loving city. Um, I also won a World Junior Gold Medal, won a Memorial Cup, won a couple OHL championships. I mean, it was just it was one of those, it wasn't a decade, but it was one of those, almost decades in your life that you look back and go, boy, you know, that was really special. And you know what, it was a really humbling night for me, to stand at the Kitchener Auditorium. That rink's, I don't know, 80 years old.
One of the best barns in hockey, like
Yeah, and
hands down.
iconic, and it's one of the only ones that really they haven't torn down and replaced with one of these new cookie cutter rinks.
Yeah,
They've kept the character of it. The fans are so passionate, and it was humbling to stand there and know the history of that building, the history of that team. The fact that that the next guy going in is Brian Bellows, and I'm sure after that it'll be
that's
Mike
awesome.
Richards and Derek Roy, and but the great players, Al McInnes, Scott Stevens, that are already up in the rafters. Just a really humbling night for a guy who was a minor league player that got into coaching, and for me to land in that spot at that time, and meet the people and work with the people I did was just one of those pinch me moments in my life.
That's awesome. I wanted to ask you about the 2003 Memorial Cup, and part of the reasons I was at that tournament, and I got to go because I was coaching at the time and trail in the BCHL, and one of our scouts, Carl Savard, had played in the Q, went to the University of Alberta. He was the Oilers' third goalie during the 80s, and went on to have a successful career in construction site safety management. But he would bring us kids from Quebec, and he had a relationship with Patrick Waugh, and he said, "Hey, would you be able to help me get some players from out west, if they clear waivers, can go out and play for Patrick in Quebec?" So we managed to get him a few players, and so that year we get bounced from the playoffs, and Carl calls me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to go to the Memorial Cup?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Carl, I'd love to," but I'm assistant coach in junior A hockey. Like, I couldn't afford to hitchhike out there. He's like, "No, no, no." He's like, "Patrick's like, he phony, like he'll pick up the bill and fly you out there. We're gonna stay at the team hotel. It's gonna be great." And I was like, "Sounds excellent." And I can guarantee that nobody had more fun in Quebec City that week than I did. But
I might give you a run for it, at least the last night.
but three things stand out to me about your team or that tournament. Like, one was at the old Colisée, when the period would start again, or I guess between periods, there was, in all four corners of the rink there was these stairwells, and everybody would go in the stairwells to smoke. So when the period started again, there'd be this waft of smoke in the Colisée that would take a few minutes to burn off. Two, um, I, I was like, I had never seen any hockey player compete shift in and shift out like Mike Richards. Like, I wish we had Huddle and Instead at that time. I just would have told like all the kids, they just watch him and do what he does. But the third was, I remember, I think you guys lost. It was a tight game against Quebec in the opener. But, of course, everybody's talking about like who the favorite is, et cetera. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, I don't think anybody's been able to stop this Kitchener team. And I don't know, this is an outsider's perspective. Like, I don't know how much coaching you had to do in that tournament, because it just seemed like your kids had two hands on the wheel and were like, we got our destiny in our hands here. When do you know as a coach that it's maybe time to step back and that the players got it, and to
Yeah.
just let them go?
That's a great question. You know what? In our trail that year to the 2003 Memorial Cup, we went into Plymouth against the Plymouth Whalers in the OHL semifinals in an elimination game, facing elimination game six. So we had to win game six in Plymouth, come back and win game seven in Kitchener in order to advance. So we had gone through uh, some really tough teams and some tough situations to get to that point. And, um, when we got there, it's funny, but when do you know? You just sense it. I had a feeling. You could just feel that our group had gone, okay, we've gone through the ringer here, and we're here now, and we're going to make sure that we deliver here. And they did. We won all three round robin games. Went right to the final, and I believe was it Brandon? No, it was Duncan Keith,
Kelowna
and yeah, and
Rockets.
Hull,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
Hull played off, and Hull upset Kelowna, and then we got Hull in the final, and that was a home crowd for them at the
Yeah.
Colisée in Quebec. But at that point there, I think you go into a lot of games as a coach, and you're not sure how your team's going to react. I never had any question that week about our group. We had gone through so much
Yeah.
over the year that they were dialed in, and it was a special team, special leadership, special depth. And you're right. There's not a lot of coaching at that point. We're playing three teams in that tournament that don't play in our league. I don't remember doing a ton of pre-scouts. I mean, you obviously pointed out personnel, Duncan Keith, things like that, but Claude Giroux, I believe, was on Hull. But you know, there wasn't a ton of coaching, and honestly, coaching probably would have got in the way at that point. You just wanted to let them go and play. I didn't feel we were going to play a better team than we had already played in Plymouth and Ottawa in the semifinals and finals of the OHL, and uh, so I think all those teams were good, but I think the players had a confidence about them and their game.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that confidence too. So, years ago, I was an assistant coach at UBC, and we recruited Matt Pepe, who was your captain, and I guess was it 2009 or
Eight, eight,
2008? Yeah, that you
yeah.
guys hosted. And one of the benefits of being at a place like UBC or coaching in youth sports is that you get to pick the brain of all the players, of all the coaches they've played for, and what worked and what didn't, and etc. And I'll tell you, like Matt Pep, it was just like Kitchener this, Kitchener that, and Kitchener we did this. We're like, fuck, we get it, Matt Kitchener. But one thing he said to me, but I will say it goes to show like there was a culture there that the players
Yeah.
felt like they were a part of something bigger than themselves. But one thing he said that has always stuck with me, he said, I said, I was just asking myself, like, what's kind of the secret sauce there? And he thinks about it. He goes, you know what it is? He goes, you know, we might lose a game or we might lose two games, but he goes, you'd go into Pete and Spotter's office and they'd be playing like the little mini golf on the office. Or they would be, he goes, they were always so loose. And he said, we fed off them. And he goes, we never doubted that we were going to win every game we went into. And he goes, it was just a direct reflection of how they just kind of carried themselves around the group. And I just think of, I mean, you probably came from an era where, if your team loses two in a row, the coach kicks the garbage can or, make
Mhm.
sure everybody's miserable the next day. And I'd just be curious, like how, because I mean, you guys were so young back then.
Mhm.
Like, was that intentional or was that just something that organically, just the way it kind of, you guys operated?
You know what? I was very fortunate. I didn't have a long playing career, but I played for some exceptional coaches. I played for Tommy Webster in junior
Yeah.
hockey,
Yeah.
uh, who coached the Rangers, the LA Kings, and Tommy, he'd kick a garbage can every once in a while, but he had, he approached things like that. He wanted to have fun at the rink. He thought the guy should play loose, play hard, but make sure you enjoy it. And then Paul Maurice ended up being his assistant, and after he was our captain, and I think Paul really approaches things like that. So those were two of my junior coaches, and then I turned pro, uh, and I had Ron Wilson, who was my coach in the minors in Milwaukee, and Ronnie Wilson wasn't one of those hard ass crack the whip type coaches. He was more modern, and more relationship driven, and more relax. Let's have some fun with this. So I think for sure parts of that are attributed to that. And then when I first started coaching, I coached again with Paul Maurice, right? So, those guys really were the guys that I looked to. And, when I started coaching and building my coaching, uh, characteristics, the things that I wanted to be, it was taking the best things from those type of guys. And a lot of those were similar.
How is Paul Maurice as a landlord?
Slumlord, I would call
Oh,
it. Not,
so,
not a landlord. He was definitely a
yeah,
slumlord.
yeah,
It was not a pretty place. But Paul was ahead of his time. I mean, you hear all these podcasts now about all these guys that are, buying duplexes and renting them out and paying for their university, house hacking or whatever it's called. Like
yeah.
Paul was doing that 30 years ago. He finished playing. People don't know this, but he's the main reason there's visors in the OHL. He lost his eye, put his stick out, his
No
defenseman slap
way,
shot,
really?
yeah, up into his eye, lost sight in his eye, and then visors came in the next year in the OHL. But his playing career ended basically because of that. He continued to play a little bit, but it was essentially done his pro aspirations. And he started coaching. He bought this 5 or 6 bedroom, little house that was run down, and rented out all the rooms while he was going to the University of Windsor and starting his coaching career. And then we would come home in the summer from playing pro. I was playing in the minors. Adam Graves was playing in Detroit. Glenn Featherstone lived there. He played in St. Louis and Boston. All junior teammates, and we all would
Sounds like
sublet.
a reality TV show.
Oh
Jesus.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
We would all sublet a room
yeah.
from the guys Paul rented to during the school year. So we had a lot of fun, and yeah, he was a great landlord, and then a roommate. I think we both grew out of that house. We both got disgusted by the living arrangements, and he kept it and rented it out. But him and I moved into a nicer place, a 2 bedroom place together when we started coaching together.
Well, I'd be curious, like when you guys started coaching. I mean, I was doing the math here. I'm like, I think Paul was hired by Hartford when he was, I think, 27 or 28. So you're a couple years his junior. If the two of you could go back now and mentor the two of you then, what would you kind of maybe give yourselves credit for doing right? And is there any areas you would have said, hey guys, you'd probably benefit from these insights?
Oh God, we were flying blind.
Yeah.
And big credit. We were so lucky now when you look back at it and you put it in perspective like that. Like I can't. I've got a son who's 25 and a son who's 23. I was the fact Paul coached in the NHL as a head coach at 27 or 28 is absolutely mind-boggling. I mean,
Yeah.
I went into the league at 40 into Florida for my first job, and I didn't feel ready. I was the youngest coach in the league at that time at
Were you
40.
really? Wow.
Yeah, and I didn't feel ready. The fact he was there at 27 or 28 with, a guy who never played in the NHL, is just amazing, and shows you, you know, both his maturity, his natural leadership and his versatility. But, I had to learn some of those things. I was more of a slow burn guy than Paul. And honestly, I was really happy in junior hockey. I loved being coach and GM. I loved the fact that all the decisions in building the roster and drafting the players and bringing in pieces and moving out pieces, uh, you know, stopped and started with me. Having said that, the thing that there's a danger to that too, because the emotions of coaching and the 10,000-foot view of general managing, is totally different. And if I look back, the mistakes I made were out of coaching emotion. traded a guy because he missed curfew, ended up, being one of the best players in the league. That kind of stuff, never would happen if you're doing both. So, but Pete Carmanis, who owned the team, and Jim Rutherford, who was our general manager and president,
Yeah, I
and
learned that's unbelievable. Yeah.
yeah, they basically handed the keys to both of us, and let us slip and fall and get up and make mistakes and keep moving forward. And God, it was special time and a special opportunity. And obviously, I wouldn't be here without having crossed paths, and that goes to show you, you do need some luck in this game. I mean, if I'm not drafted to the Windsor Spitfires, and Jim Rutherford's not my general manager, and Pete Carmanis isn't my owner, um, you know, you always wonder where, do you ever get those opportunities? What would you end up doing? So, I'm not oblivious to some of the great fortune I've had along the way too.
Well, you know what? I think it takes luck. But I look at your career, like over 1,400 NHL games behind an NHL bench, over 700 wins. I don't think that you accomplish that or get those other opportunities unless you've got an incredibly strong work ethic and you just treat people the right way. How much of your success is rooted in growing up in Dunnville, Ontario, and just your family
Yeah.
environment?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question, Aaron, and it doesn't get enough play when I talk about my career path. Um, my mother was from a Ukrainian farming town in northern
No way.
Manitoba. Yeah,
Yeah.
Swan River,
Oh, wow,
Manitoba,
way up there.
way up there. And her family still has a farm up there. My cousin runs it. And my father was a Dutch immigrant that came over when he was 17 from Holland, and the big migration, um, when they were looking for farm workers in Canada and didn't have enough, and he started working on a farm in Manitoba, and that's where they
No
met.
way.
So
Wow.
we ended up in Ontario because he ended up working in the mines, and then in the steel industry, and we ended up in the Hamilton area and lived in Dunnville. But hardworking immigrant families. Neither of them. My dad never played a game of hockey in his life, and so the fact that one they that I was given the opportunity to play hockey, and all the things that came with that, were great. And the fact we settled in a town like Dunnville, again, typical little small Canadian town, 10,000 people, farming community, but hockey crazy. The Dunnville
Yeah.
Mudcats,
Great name.
legendary senior
Yeah.
hockey team. It was right out of Slapshot. I mean, they'd brawl you. It was every weekend. That's where you'd go as a kid to go watch the senior game down at the Dunnville Arena. And at that time when I grew up, even if you were a good player, we had a lot of good players in town in my age group and the age groups around me. But you didn't leave to go play AAA. We were a single B center, so
Yeah.
you played other centers your size, 10,000 people. So they were all other small towns, and no one left. I mean, you stayed. You graduated to the junior C team in town, which was the Dunnville Terriers, and then from there, in my age group in that small town, we had three of us drafted to the OHL. I went and played in Windsor. Two other guys on my team, Scott Maisie, ended up being one of the captains at Miami, Ohio, and Mike Dunham ended up going, I believe, to St. Lawrence, or kind of went the scholarship path. So we just had, it was a great environment to grow up in if you loved hockey, because that town was all hockey all the time.
Oh man. Well, I think we sometimes I wonder if we need a bit more of that. Just playing close to home and representing your community, especially at the youth levels in our sport. But given your parents' background. I would imagine that when you say, "Hey, mom and dad, I'm going to law school," they must be ecstatic. How does the conversation go with, "Hey, mom and dad, I'm not going to do this lawyer thing. I'm going to be a hockey coach instead"?
Yeah, you know what? I think. Well, my mom was just dumbfounded.
Yeah,
I had just graduated law school. I had while I was going to law school, I had been coaching with Paul
yeah,
Maurice, and then Paul left for Hartford that summer, and I had a job lined up at a law firm. I was moving on with my law career. I mean, I'd been an assistant coach with Paul for 2 years. I loved it. I loved it, but it wasn't going to pay the bills. And I had just invested all this time in a law degree. So I had a job lined up. I was getting ready to article at a firm in Windsor, and Paul left for the NHL, and they offered me the coach GM job. And at the time, the salary was probably a little more than half of what I would have made at the law firm, and sure, with a lot less prospects for success. The law firm would have been here, and then you're off and running. And the way the law worked at that time was you graduated, you got in a good firm, you grinded for 5 or 6 years, you became a partner, and then you were on an easy street. And the path for a junior hockey coach at that time was you get behind the bench and you grind. And and what I mean, there, Paul Maurice made it work, but there was a million guys that ended up with nothing from that. So my mom couldn't believe I was making that decision. I think my dad secretly was happy. And I'll tell you the one thing that it gave them over the years, it was a constant um uh, um thing that forced us to get together. I mean, they became fans of wherever I was coaching. In their senior years, they would come on the road to Plymouth, to Kitchener, wherever I was working, coaching Florida. It was a magnet, to keep the family together, because it was something they liked to do, that competition. It wasn't just, oh, we're going to go visit the grandkids. It was always based around a Kitchener Ranger game, or a Plymouth Whaler game, or a Florida Panther game. So, when looking back, obviously the right decision for me, but even more importantly, from a family perspective, we had a lot of great memories because of that decision.
well, you mentioned Florida. You go there, you cut your teeth. It's funny. We had Jim Halton on the show a couple weeks
Yeah.
ago, and I didn't know him, super guy, um, but he was talking about that learning curve, and I wonder, like, what about that jump, or I guess, what lessons can't you learn until you actually get behind an NHL bench?
Well, when you mentioned that, I remember vividly. So, I'm putting my staff together. I get hired that summer right out of junior hockey. And Mike Kitchen is a holdover from
Yeah.
Florida, so he's already there. An old veteran guy, played in the NHL, coached for years, ended up being a godsend for us. But the rest of my staff I filled out with Jimmy Halton and Jamie Pringle out of the OHL. Both of them, had
Oh,
been
Jamie.
coaching
Yeah.
in the OHL.
Yeah.
So I still remember the three of us getting on our first, charter flight at the NHL level, and looking at the menu with the filet mignon and the shrimp
Yeah.
cocktails flying around, and we're looking at each other going, "Do you believe this?" Like, the three of us 3 months before were sitting on a bus between Belleville and Windsor, and eating pizza, cold pizza out of a box. So, I think, again, probably a lot like Paul Maurice and I, we were in over our head. And it's a good thing for coaches and any young people out there. You, I don't know if you ever feel confident, I got this, in those situations. Whenever you're going to another level to coach or to work, or you're walking into those rooms, you don't let them see you sweat, but you jump in with 2 feet. And I always took the approach that, what, if I'm going to do what I do, and go with my beliefs, and if it doesn't work out and I get fired, at least I can sleep at night. Um, and Were we in over our heads? Sure, we were. But we battled together, and that first year we actually, I thought, did a hell of a job. We tied for the last playoff spot after that Florida team had not made the playoffs for a long time, lost in a tiebreaker to Montreal. But that team played their ass off for us, and it was a really enjoyable moment. It was one of those aha moments for me of, okay, I can do this at this level, and have an impact.
Well, I think one of the things that stands out in you're 8-0 in game sevens, and you
Nine.
know 9-0. We missed
9-0.
one. Okay, I was
Last
going off
year,
of
yeah.
game seven against Colorado. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess with that being said, like, what's I think for a lot of young coaches in particular, the instinct is, in a big moment, we want to be as prepared as possible, and ultimately that results in you take all that information you gather, and you're like, well, we're just gonna get a shovel and give it to the players. How do you think about information management in big games? What
Yeah.
do the players need?
Well, the reason I correct you on 9-0 is because I haven't won a Stanley Cup yet. So it's the one thing I'm hanging my hat on right now
Yeah,
is 9-0. Uh, you
it's
know
an
what?
incredible, right? Like it's crazy to
Yeah.
think. Yeah,
It is crazy, and you know what? There's no magic formula to it. People have asked me about it. Every one of those wins is different, different situations. Down in series, coming back, double overtime, one of them, overtime, another one, late comebacks, some blowouts. I mean, all kinds of different situations. So I don't think there's one magic formula. Though the one common denominator there, though, is I've always enjoyed the one-on-one matchup of a playoff series against one team where, unlike the regular season where you're playing someone moving on to the next team, you can dial in on one opponent for 2 weeks and really dig in, to the analytics and the strengths and weaknesses and what you can expose and make those adjustments game to game. I mean, that for me is the best part of coaching. And I think when you've done that in a 7 game series and you get to game seven, you know, I'm of the feeling, your message has been pounded home of the things that to your players at that point that you think are the keys to winning against that team. And
yeah,
at that point, I think you really take a step back. Hey, the message is, you guys know, we won 3 of these games. They've won 3. The 3 we've won, we've done certain things, and the 3 we've lost, we've gotten away from those things. Let's just do them tonight, and we'll be on the right side of this. And for the most part, I've been very, very fortunate too. A lot of big goals at key times, a lot of big
for
saves
sure.
at key times. I remember the double overtime, my first NHL playoff, New Jersey Devils. We go to the Stanley Cup Finals my first year in New Jersey, my fourth year in the NHL. But we almost don't get out of round one. We played Florida in round one, and we're down in Florida for game seven. We had to win an elimination game, game six in New Jersey, because we didn't have home ice. We go down to Florida for game seven, and Marty Brodeur made 4 or 5 spectacular saves in the first overtime to get us to the second overtime, where Adam Henrique scored, so that we could move on. And then we beat Philly, and then we beat the Rangers, and then lost to LA in the final. But and the Rangers was a game six overtime, but that was Henrique again. Kovalchuk was part of that. But all kinds of different scenarios.
For sure. Well, I think a recent one that stands out to me, I think last year when, you're kind of getting set for the playoffs and you see that, oh man, the Stars and Avalanche are going to play in the first round. It was kind of must watch TV. And, that series kind of reminded me a little bit of like a Rocky montage. You're like,
Yeah,
just one team would sort of get on the other one. You're like, hey, this is over. Then the other team kind of comes back. I think, it was 5-1 in game one.
yeah,
Colorado looked great. You guys come back, win an overtime, but then you guys go up 2-1. You're like, oh, this is going there. And then it's like, no, it's going, Colorado comes back. But, you know, it's easy as a fan to get caught up in those, emotions, and it's human nature. But how do you, as a coach, reset your team's focus and sort of draw that line that says, hey, like, that was then, and now we're on to the next game, and whether we lost 5-1 or we won 4-3 in OT, none of that's going to influence what happens next.
Yeah, key messaging in the playoffs.
Yeah,
And it's different than the regular season. In the regular season, sometimes it's important to kind of sit and stew in where your game's at sometimes, not all
sure.
the time, but in the playoffs, there's no time for that. I mean, that game ends win or loss. It's over, and you're immediately clearing the slate in your player's mind and getting them ready for the next game. And I was really proud of our group in that series because we played without Miro Heiskanen and Jason Robertson, and
That's right. Yeah,
Colorado was a wagon of a team. And in the games we were off even a little bit, they absolutely demolished us. Like it wasn't even close. And I think that's what we learned through that series is we had to play a really detailed game just to have a chance to win because every time our details slipped a little bit, they absolutely demolished us. Some of the scores and some of the periods of hockey, even when maybe, you know, they didn't light the lamp as much as they could have. I mean, they beat us 5-1 in game one. I can remember maybe game six in there, them out shooting us 20-3 at one point in one of the periods. So, I mean, if you were off a little bit, they absolutely tilted the ice. So, our group stuck with it. We stuck with it, and overcame some key losses to some key guys there, and honestly, the difference was game seven at home. Home ice, and that's what you play the regular season for, and it can't. I'm not sure how important it is in the playoffs until you get to a game seven, and then I think it's important that home ice crowd and that buzz and the energy you get from your home ice crowd in those situations becomes important.
what are the details that have the biggest influence on winning?
Um, you know what? Hockey's a pretty simple game. When you boil it right down, um, you can't overcome a lack of compete in one-on-one battles. If you lose the one-on-one battle uh, element to the game, if the other team's harder and heavier and hungrier than you, yeah, you're probably not winning. Um, you also can't beat yourselves and turn pucks over. You've got to have some responsibility to your puck management every night. Um, and then in playoffs too, special teams and goaltending are two really key elements all the time. But particularly come playoff time.
Leadership can be lonely, and I can only imagine how that's amplified in a profession where your adversity is on the front page of a newspaper and on sports talk radio, etc. Um, During your career, or at least portions of your career, like how valuable was it to have someone like Spotter by your side just to kind of navigate those ebbs and flows?
Yeah, critical. Your support. You need a big support. You need a great support group if you're going to coach. And
Yeah,
it starts with your family.
yeah.
Anybody that gets into coaching knows the stars of a coach's life are their family because they're the ones that have to clean up the mess. When you back the moving truck up and have to go to the next city, and your kids have to leave school, and your wife has to pack up and meet new friends. There's huge sacrifices to this game uh, from a coaching perspective on the family end of it. We walk into a rink with a new job, and we immediately have a family there. 25 players, staff, coaches, your family shows up in a new city, and they've got to start fresh all the time. So that's the really tough part about coaching. And Spotter, not only the fact he's a great coach and a great teacher, and he's a great compliment to me. He's got a contagious fun side to him that, regardless of the situation, people gravitate towards, and he keeps it loose and makes me laugh, on a daily basis. But it also was a help for my wife, because him and his wife and my wife were really close. Our kids were really close. So that also became part of it. Hey, it's also easier on both our families if we're doing this together. So it's been a special relationship.
No, I mean, I think you can see that. Just on the note of, when you get let go and you move on, like literally like 5 minutes before we jump on here, I was on a call with a friend who just got let go. It's a tough conversation, and I think that we can all relate to situations in our life where we feel like there's no way through, but then we get on the other side and we realize that the sun still comes up. But you got to go through that. For any coaches listening that have gone through that, or might go through that, do you have any, just from the emotional, mental side, any advice on how you kind of navigate that?
You know what? Yes, I do. One, remove the emotion from it, and hockey's a small world. So regardless of how you feel about being let go, if you feel it was unfair, you got a raw deal, um, remove the emotion from that, and don't burn bridges. It doesn't help you going forward. And most of the time, you realize, when you remove yourself from the situation, that you have a greater understanding of why it happened, or the other side's perspective. And a lot of time, you have more respect for that than in the emotion of the minute. And so that's always critical, because I can tell you, I got let go in Florida, my first NHL job. We had three ownership groups, three general managers. I was pissed off. I thought I'd got a raw deal. Like, there was no stability. We were playing under the cap, and I was a pissed off young coach, and rather than walk out of there and basically uh, tell the world how pissed off I was and how raw a deal I got, I kind of swallowed it, and quietly went away, and went to work on trying to get another opportunity. And
Yeah,
the GM who fired me, Dale Talon,
yeah,
ended up being best friends with Doug Wilson, who 2 jobs later hired me in San Jose for one of my best stops in the
yeah.
NHL.
Great lesson there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that doesn't happen if that situation, if I don't handle that situation the way I do. And so, and I don't blame Dale. And when I got away from the situation, I didn't blame Dale at all. I mean, he wanted his own guy. I wasn't his guy, and he brought in Kevin Deneen, who's got his own battle going on right now, and
Yeah.
we're all thinking about him in the hockey world. But it was the right decision. That Kevin did a fantastic job with that Florida team the year after I left.
Well, you talk about what a small world it is. I can only imagine that you've got a lot of friends right now that, they get the benefit of picking up the phone and maybe bouncing things off you, and getting a neutral voice on the other end of those calls. When that happens, like, what's the nature, or what kind of information are people looking to get your insights into?
Yeah. It's great. It's one of my favorite parts of being out of the game, is I have time for that now.
Yeah.
I'm not in a rush to get to the next place, or worry, totally concentrating on my own team and preoccupied with what's going on in my own dressing room. That I can actually sit down and really help and have good conversations. When I went to Kitchener, I talked with their their great young Finnish coach for a while, UC, and
Yeah, he's
uh,
awesome.
yeah, he's fantastic. I've done it with a bunch of other guys. So, that's the best part about coaching is I wouldn't be here. The coaching fraternity is a sharing fraternity. We always have been. I don't know what it is. It's in our DNA. We're not like some other professions where everything's a state secret and you keep it to yourself because someone's going to get ahead of you. When I came into the hockey world, it was all about sharing. I'd go to the Hockey Canada events. I started with the under 18 team, and Dave King and Tom Rennie and Mike Babcock and Ken Hitchcock. Everybody was an open book on sharing knowledge they had, and that made me a better coach. And I feel a little obligation to pay that forward, because of the benefit that I had from it growing up.
Speaking of growing up, you got two boys that played hockey, and again, I'm guessing that they probably would have started their minor hockey journey perhaps in New Jersey or Florida.
The meat of their youth hockey was in New Jersey. We started, it would have been in Florida. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of minor hockey coaches tuning into this, and I would imagine just given the treadmill that's an NHL season, I mean, you're probably maybe not as involved in their minor hockey journey as you might have liked to be. So the onus really goes on, their coaches aren't just their coaches, they're probably like their role models, like that carries a little bit of a different weight. I'd just be curious, what's in your opinion, like what's this maybe the central role or the thing that youth coaches need to keep top of mind?
Yeah. Well, one, thank you for everything you did. My kids would have never played at the Division One level without the great youth coaches that we had, because I was not around. My wife was raising three kids and trying to get them places, basically on her own, and those men and women that coached my kids were had a direct impact in any successes they had in hockey. The second message in that is, as hockey parents, please recognize their importance and don't chase good young people out of the game, because we need them, and we need that youthful enthusiasm that wants to give back, that wants to get involved. And I see so much of that get taken out of them early by, unfortunately, crazy hockey parents,
Yeah.
that have too high expectations and too much involvement and have lost perspective. So, please recognize the importance of them, and give them, some runway to let them do their thing. It's not going to be perfect.
Yeah.
They're not they're not going to look like Paul Maurice behind the bench and give a pregame speech like Pat Quinn would, but
Yeah.
they're trying, and your kids are looking at them like they're Paul Maurice and Pat Quinn. In their eyes, that's who they
Totally.
are.
Yeah.
So, recognize that, and just stick with it. It's such the most rewarding time of my coaching career was coaching junior hockey. I never really coached youth. I coached a little bit, helping out here and there, but I wish I would have, because I think it would have been as rewarding as junior was for me. The same lesson. You can make a difference in these kids' lives at those ages that you're coaching, youth through junior. You um, not just on the ice, but life lessons, things that they're going to remember forever. At the pro level, I'm not making that type of impact on a pro player. Um, it's a business. It's rewarding in its own way, but you're not affecting lives like youth and junior hockey coaches are. And when you look back, and when I look back at my career, you know, th- those are the most rewarding years of my career.
Well said. Hey, Pete, we really appreciate your time. I know we're supposed to be neutral on this show, but obviously goes without saying, rooting for you and Team Canada coming up here at the Olympics, and enjoy that experience, and enjoy a little bit more space and time
Yeah.
in your day to day.
Thanks, Aaron. Happy holidays to you and all the hockey fans out there. And you guys do a wonderful job educating the next generation of coaches that are on the way. So appreciate what you do.